On the afternoon of April 18, 1956, a woman from Philadelphia signs a marriage register on a rock above the Mediterranean, and the ceremony ends without a kiss. Reporters in the room notice. The Washington Post files a dispatch describing a kissless marriage, a civil ceremony carrying an air of tension and sadness rather than joy, and a groom who warned his bride in advance not to expect public displays of affection. So the most photographed romance of the decade opens with a legal formality and a woman briefed beforehand on the correct facial expression. Outside the palace walls, the wire services report something else entirely, a fairy tale. An American actress at the peak of her fame, an Academy Award on her shelf, marries a European sovereign prince and vanishes into a country the size of a large golf course. Cinderella, but with better lighting. Both descriptions come from the same building on the same day. Everything that follows sits in the gap between them, because the marriage of Grace Kelly and Rainier III of Monaco did not begin as a romance that later acquired paperwork. The paperwork came first. A Hollywood studio sold exclusive film rights to the ceremony, and a father in Philadelphia wired $2 million into a royal treasury before the bride reached the altar. Underneath all of it sat a treaty clause drafted in 1918, which converted the question of whether this particular woman could bear children into a matter of French foreign policy. And a prince, asked at his own engagement press conference whether his fiancée would keep acting, answered for her. So how did a woman with total professional autonomy end up in a country where she held no legal standing whatsoever? Rewind to 1952. Grace Kelly signs a 7-year contract with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer starting at $850 a week, and the salary itself carries nothing worth discussing. What is not ordinary for a studio contract of that era sits in the clauses. Every 2 years, Kelly retains the right to take time off for New York theater work, and she keeps her primary residence in Manhattan rather than relocating permanently to Los Angeles. Those two clauses detonate in about 4 years. The studio system of the 1950s existed to own people, and MGM in particular treated its contract players as depreciating assets to be scheduled, loaned out, photographed, and eventually written down. Kelly carved out an exemption from geography. By late 1955, she holds an Academy Award, a run of films with Alfred Hitchcock, and multi-year obligations still outstanding on that contract when the Palace in Monaco announced her engagement. MGM now owns a legal claim on the working years of the most bankable woman in American cinema, and the woman in question intends to walk away from all of it inside 4 months. The studio has options. MGM held every legal right to suspend her without pay or bury her in injunctions, and studios of that era did not shrug at early departures. So the Palace and the studio negotiate. What MGM extracts as the price of her freedom counts as one of the strangest arrangements in the history of celebrity commerce, and it turns the wedding itself into inventory. Before we get to the price, understand the buyer. Rainier III is not shopping for a wife out of loneliness, or even out of the ordinary dynastic vanity that arranged European royal marriages for the previous 4 centuries. He is shopping under a deadline written into international law. Article 3 of the Franco-Monegasque Treaty, signed July 17, 1918, states the terms plainly. Should the reigning Prince of Monaco die without a legitimate heir, the principality ceases to exist as a sovereign entity and becomes an autonomous protectorate under direct French control. No heir, no country. The Grimaldi dynasty ruled the rock for roughly 7 centuries, and a paragraph drafted into the final year of the First World War converted that inheritance into a biological wager. Sit with what that clause does to a marriage. A wife in this house is not a companion, but a constitutional mechanism, and her reproductive capacity is not private business between 2 people. It is the load-bearing wall of a nation-state, and every foreign ministry in Europe can read the treaty text for itself and run the arithmetic on her marriage. Biographers assert that French officials began preparing the diplomatic protocols to absorb Monaco by 1960 if Rainier remained unmarried, though that claim comes from James Spada's 1987 biography and belongs in the attributed column rather than the documented one. The treaty needs no biographer. It is a public document printed in the official gazettes of 2 governments, and it sat there from 1918 onward, ticking. By 1955, Rainier is 32, running out of time, and presiding over a dying economy. Enter Aristotle Onassis. The Greek shipping magnate holds the controlling stake in the Société des Bains de Mer, the company that operates Monaco's casino and much of its hotel property, which means Onassis effectively owns the machinery that pays for Monaco. His investment is underperforming. Monte Carlo, in the mid-1950s, has become a faded resort where elderly money sits in the sun, and faded resorts do not generate the tourism volume a shipping magnate expects from his portfolio. According to Robert Lacey's biography, Onassis advises Rainier to solve the problem with publicity, and specifically to marry a famous American film star. Global press coverage, American tourists, capital flowing back through the casino doors, and Monaco rebranded overnight from a sunlit waiting room into the most glamorous address in Europe. That is the pitch. The plan works exactly as advertised, which counts as its own small horror. Lacey also reports that intermediaries around Onassis floated Marilyn Monroe as a candidate before Kelly entered the picture. Marilyn Monroe, Princess of Monaco. Pause on that alternate history for a moment and consider that the entire modern image of Monaco, the elegance, the restraint, the yacht decks, the sense that money there arrives with manners, rests partly on which actress a casino shareholder's associates happen to suggest first. In May 1955, the French journalist Pierre Galante arranged an introduction between Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier III. Both of those accounts sit in the attributed column. They come from biographers working with secondhand testimony rather than from any minute of a board meeting, and nobody transcribed the conversation. But the structural facts around them are documented, and they do not require a rumor to be alarming. A bankrupt adjacent monarchy, an expiring treaty clause, a casino operator with a publicity problem, and a 25-year-old American woman who has just won an Oscar. Back to MGM and to the invoice. To secure an early release from her contract without a legal fight, Kelly agrees to grant the studio exclusive commercial film and distribution rights to her own wedding. Not a licensing fee, not a buyout, but the wedding itself, converted into product. The result appears in cinemas as The Wedding in Monaco, a 31-minute documentary released in 1956. MGM Publicity frames the arrangement as a fair exchange in which the studio loses its star, gains a film, and walks away square with the ledger balanced. Everyone wins, so now open the ledger. Eddie Mannix, MGM's fixer, and the keeper of the studio's internal accounting, recorded the numbers. The Wedding in Monaco grossed $108,000 across the United States and Canada, and another $51,000 across the rest of the world, which sounds respectable enough until the deductions come off. Net profit, $15,000. That is what MGM actually collected in exchange for the remaining contract. Years of an Academy Award-winning actress at the height of her commercial value. A single Kelly picture would have earned the studio multiples of that figure. The studio also handled the trousseau. MGM supplied Kelly's royal wardrobe and assigned its own costume designer, Helen Rose, to create the wedding gown, retaining promotional rights over the clothing. So the dress that would be copied by brides for the next 70 years, the single most reproduced garment in the history of weddings, arrived in Monaco as a studio asset with a rights agreement attached to the hem. So the shape of it comes out like this. A woman purchased her way out of a Hollywood contract by selling her wedding to Hollywood, which means the freedom and the cage came off the same studio lot in the same year, filed by the same accountants under promotional expenditure. MGM did not send the only invoice. Before the April 1956 wedding, $2 million moved from the Kelly family estate in Philadelphia to the Grimaldi royal treasury. A dowry, documented, transferred, done. Donald Spoto records both the figure and the transaction, and no serious account of the marriage disputes that the payment cleared into the Grimaldi treasury before the ceremony. John B. Kelly Sr., known as Jack, built a fortune in brickworks and an Olympic reputation in rowing, and he did not enjoy being billed for his daughter's marriage. James Spada reports that Kelly's initial reaction to the dowry demand ran along the lines of, My daughter doesn't have to pay any man to marry her, delivered to intermediaries before he transferred the capital anyway. Note the sequence: objection, then compliance. He told the press in Philadelphia in 1955 that royalty didn't mean that much to the Kellys, and that he hoped the prince wouldn't run around the way some princes do. Time magazine printed the remark in May of that year. It reads as a bricklayer's warning shot fired at a sovereign house, delivered in public, and it aged into an accidental prophecy. The quote also happens to be misfiled. For decades, various retellings attributed those words to Grace Kelly herself, and they are not hers. Her father delivered them to reporters about a courtship roughly a year before the wedding. One misfiled attribution grants a woman who never issued a public demand of her future husband a spine that the surviving record does not support. Then there is the matter of the medical examination. Sarah Bradford writes that royal advisors required Kelly to undergo a premarital medical and fertility examination to certify that she could produce an heir before the engagement could be formalized. Wendy Lee's account goes considerably further, describing an invasive and humiliating procedure conducted by a royal physician specifically to verify her reproductive capacity. Neither writer produces a document. What is documented is narrower and in some ways worse. General medical examinations ranked as standard protocol for European royal marriages in the 1950s, which is to say, a box on a form and an administrative nothing. The specific claim of a targeted fertility inspection rests on biographers, rather than on any surviving medical record, and honest history has to leave it in the attributed column. But return to Article 3 and the temperature changes. In a state whose sovereignty legally expires without a legitimate heir, a fertility check is not a rumor that needs proving. It is the obvious institutional response to the incentive. The 1918 treaty converted her body into a question of national security, and nobody sitting around that table in 1955 would have found the paperwork strange. For all the machinery, Kelly's own recorded words from this period do not sound like a hostage. They sound like a woman with a sharp eye and limited patience for the pageantry closing in around her. Speaking to Paris Match in March 1956, she explained that she would not be showing the prince her wedding dress before the day because she wanted to keep it a surprise for him. A bride being a bride. Then palace protocol informed the couple that they would spend the night before the religious ceremony in separate quarters, despite having been legally married in the civil ceremony the previous day. Married in the eyes of the state, separated by order of the household. Kelly's response, recorded by Bradford: "This is absolutely Victorian." 3 words, 1 exclamation mark, and an entire attitude, carrying no weeping in it and no submission. She is standing in a palace corridor in 1956, rolling her eyes at an institution that has decided the law of Monaco is less binding than the customs of Monaco. Not tragedy, but exasperation. Now the architecture. Because the constraints on Grace Kelly were not personality clashes or the ordinary friction of 2 stubborn people sharing a house, they were written down in law by men dead for decades. Under the Monegasque Constitution of 1911, revised on December 17, 1962, supreme executive, legislative, and judicial authority resided exclusively with the reigning sovereign prince. All 3 branches, 1 man. The prince's consort held no formal constitutional powers, no legislative vote, and no executive authority anywhere in the Monegasque governmental apparatus, which is a polite way of saying that Article 13 does not restrict her so much as decline to mention her. Then the sharper clause. Under Monegasque civil law and Grimaldi dynastic custom, supreme legal authority and custody over the royal offspring resided entirely with the sovereign prince in his capacity as head of the Grimaldi house. Not jointly, but entirely. At the January 1956 engagement press conference, in front of a press corps that flew in specifically to record every word the couple spoke, a reporter asked whether Kelly would continue making films, and Rainier answered before she could, "I don't think so." Read the room. A journalist asks a professional actress about her own career. The man beside her supplies the answer on her behalf at the moment of the announcement, and nobody present considers it worth a follow-up question. No negotiation followed, No clarification came afterward, and the career ended in 3 words spoken by someone else. After the marriage, Rainier banned the screening of Grace Kelly's films in Monegasque cinemas, every one of them, including the Hitchcock pictures and the Academy Award performance that produced the fame Monaco acquired her for. The most famous woman in Monaco could not be watched in Monaco. The prohibition served no security purpose and solved no scheduling problem. It functions as a deliberate act of institutional erasure, drawing a line between the Hollywood past and the royal present and enforcing that line with the machinery of a state. Her old life did not fade out because someone switched it off. And the dynastic authority did not stop at film reels. Bradford documents that Rainier took unilateral decisions about Princess Caroline's education, and that in 1978 he approved Caroline's early marriage to Philippe Junot over her mother's objections. Kelly's distress is documented. Her legal standing to prevent any of it did not exist. She raised the girl, and he held the code. Late 1961. Alfred Hitchcock arrives in Monaco with a proposition. He wants Princess Grace for the title role in his next psychological thriller, a picture called Marnie, and the offer arrives, attached to a $1 million contract. The character is a compulsive thief, sexually traumatized, psychologically shattered, lying her way through a series of stolen identities. Hitchcock, who directed her 3 times and understood precisely what he asked of her, flies to a sovereign principality and invites its reigning princess to play a kleptomaniac. And she wants to do it. By March 1962, the palace issued a preliminary announcement. Princess Grace will return to Hollywood during a summer leave to make the picture, and her husband, the man who closed the career with 3 words in 1956, has approved it. After 6 years of ceremonial life, the door is open. It does not stay open long, because public reaction inside Monaco turns hostile through May and June, with Monegasque citizens objecting and the French media objecting alongside them. Their princess portraying a psychologically damaged thief on international screens at a moment when Monaco's diplomatic position has become dangerously exposed. In June 1962, Rainier reverses his approval, and the palace announces that Princess Grace has withdrawn from Marnie due to scheduling conflicts and public responsibilities. Scheduling conflicts. A woman who negotiated a Broadway clause into an MGM contract at 22, lost a Hitchcock lead and $1 million fee to scheduling conflicts, and the palace expected the world to write that down without laughing. Hitchcock shot the film anyway in 1964 with Tippi Hedren. The mythology needs correcting here. The popular version, reinforced by later dramatizations, tells you that Grace Kelly traded Marnie to Charles de Gaulle, sacrificing her comeback to lift a French blockade and exchanging her career for her country's sovereignty in one noble gesture. It is a beautiful story, and the archival chronology does not support a word of it. What the chronology supports is worse in a quieter way. The 2 crises were running at the same time, in the same rooms, on the same calendar, and no document ties either one to the other. Track the dates side by side. January 23rd and 24th, 1962. Rainier dismisses Émile Peltier, the French-appointed Minister of State, and detonates a diplomatic confrontation with Charles de Gaulle, who does not take kindly to being informed by the sovereign of Iraq on his southern coastline that his own appointee is no longer welcome. March to April 1962. Kelly expresses interest in Marnie, and the palace issues its preliminary announcement about the summer shoot. April 11th and 12th, 1962. France formally gives 6 months' notice to abrogate its good neighbor treaties with Monaco. The clock starts. May to June 1962. Public outcry over the film erupts among Monegasque citizens and in the French press, and by June, Rainier has reversed course and Kelly has withdrawn. October 12th and 13th, 1962. The 6-month notice expires, and overnight French authorities throw a physical customs cordon around Monaco with border posts and inspections, a blockade of a country that measures less than a single square mile, imposed by the nation wrapped around it on 3 sides. December 17th, 1962. Rainier promulgates a revised constitution and signs a new tax treaty with France, closing an 11-month confrontation on terms drafted largely in Paris. The Rock survives. So the film negotiation and the diplomatic standoff overlapped completely through the spring of 1962. When Rainier weighed whether his wife could fly to Hollywood for a summer shoot, He did so with France openly preparing to strangle the economy of the country his marriage existed to save. The timing looks damning, but contemporaneous palace records and statements attribute the withdrawal to domestic Monegasque protest and royal dignity, not to French tax demands, which means the trade at the center of the legend never actually appears in the record. Lacy and Spoto converge. No bargain existed anywhere in the archive, and nobody in Paris ever asked for Marnie's head, which means nobody even purchased the sacrifice. She volunteered it to soothe the offended sensibilities of the citizens of a country that acquired her as a tourism asset 7 years earlier, and it bought nothing at all. The blockade came anyway, in October, 4 months after she gave up the film. Here, the standard tragedy narrative expects a decline. Silence. Ceremony. A woman fading into protocol and posed photographs while the years close over her. The record refuses to cooperate. In 1968, Kelly founded the Monaco Garden Club, promoting floral arts and botanical education, and the easy reading treats this as the hobby of a bored consort. Look at the pattern that follows, and it stops looking like a hobby. She published a book. My Book of Flowers, co-authored with Gwen Robbins, appeared from Doubleday in 1980, setting out her aesthetic thinking and reproducing the pressed flower collages she assembled over years. Doubleday is not a vanity press. She narrated a documentary. The Children of Theatre Street, directed by Robert Dornhelm in 1977, put her voice back into cinemas around the world. 21 years after her husband banned her films from the cinemas of Monaco, she returned to the stage, more or less. Through the 1970s, Kelly conducted international poetry reading tours, performing works by American poets and Shakespeare across Europe and the United States. The woman who fought MGM for stage rights spent her 40s reading verse to live audiences on 2 continents, and the palace did not stop her. Monaco still could not watch her films. And then there is the apartment. Through the mid to late 1970s, Princess Grace maintained an independent residence on Avenue Foch in Paris, living there for extended periods while her daughters attended school in the French capital. Not a hotel suite, not a state visit, but an apartment in another country, occupied for long stretches, by the wife of a reigning sovereign. What that apartment meant is where the biographers split, and the split is honest rather than lazy. Bradford's reading holds that the Avenue Foch apartment gave Kelly emotional independence, distance from court surveillance, and relief from a marriage long since cooled into a working arrangement between 2 public figures. Spoto's reading treats it as a practical arrangement for the children's schooling, within a stable, companionate partnership. Same address, 2 entirely different marriages. Neither reading can be proven, because both are attempts to reconstruct a private emotional life from the outside, and the woman at the center of it never explained herself in writing. What is not in dispute is the geography. She controlled her own money, and the freedom to keep a home in Paris and to occupy it for months at a time, which is not a facility prisons generally extend. The Paris years also produced the tabloid layer, and the tabloid layer deserves about 90 seconds and then a firm door. Frank Sinatra appears in Wendy Lee's 2007 book and in the tabloid press as a post-marital romantic liaison. Sinatra also happened to be a close friend of both Rainier and Grace, and godfather to Princess Stephanie, which is the sort of detail the tabloid trade treats as evidence rather than as the obvious alternative explanation. The claims trace back to anonymous palace gossip and posthumous accounts carrying no documented corroboration. Low reliability. David Niven, also valet. Niven lived at Cap Ferrat, dined with the Grimaldis for years, and enters the story for no reason beyond proximity, which happens to be the whole of the evidence against him. Second-hand socialite anecdotes. Low reliability. William Holden has a real foundation in the wrong decade. Spoto documents a brief romance during the filming of The Bridges at Tokori in 1954, 2 years before the marriage, confirmed by film associates carrying no particular reason to invent it. Claims of after 1956 continuation carry no documented basis whatsoever, which makes it moderate for the Hollywood era and zero for Monaco. Robert Dornhelm from Spada's 1987 book In the Tabloids, alleged as a romantic companion in late 1970s Paris. Dornhelm directed the documentary she narrated, The claim amounts to a speculative reading of a professional collaboration and an independent social life, which is to say, it amounts to nothing that could survive a courtroom or a footnote. Unreliable. Notice the mechanism. Every rumor requires the same two ingredients: a man Grace Kelly worked with or socialized with, and the assumption that a woman living partly apart from her husband must be doing something scandalous with the nearest available male. The Avenue Foch apartment did not generate evidence. It generated a vacuum, and the tabloid trade fills vacuums for a living. Now the part that breaks the title of this video, because the evidence does not care what the thumbnail promises. Start with money. Under her marriage contract and Monegasque civil law, Kelly retained independent legal ownership and administrative management of her personal wealth, including her accumulated Hollywood earnings and her family inheritance. Her capital stayed hers, and she administered it herself. In 1956, that arrangement placed her ahead of the legal position of most married women across the Western world, which is not a sentence anyone expects to write about a princess consort. Then power, the real kind, with a budget attached. Appointed president of the Monaco Red Cross in 1958, Kelly exercised executive administrative authority over the organization's annual fundraising, its infrastructure improvements, and the deployment of international humanitarian relief across borders. Not a ribbon-cutting title, but operations. In 1963, she founded Amade Mondial, the Association Mondiale des Amis de l'Enfance, and retained executive budgetary sign-off and administrative control over its global child welfare programs. She decided where the money landed. A woman with no constitutional standing whatsoever in the Monegasque state directed international aid across borders on her own signature. In 1964 came the Princess Grace Foundation, supporting local artisans and international performers. And over the following 2 decades, Monaco's reinvention as an arts capital ran substantially through her office, and the retirement itself. In documented interviews across the 1960s and 1970s, Kelly rejected the Hollywood studio system in explicit terms, describing her acting career as exhausting and superficial, and asserting that the humanitarian work delivered a deeper satisfaction. Spoto also records her consistent position that the shift from acting to motherhood and royal leadership represented a natural evolution of her life, rather than an enforced sacrifice. Both Spoto and Bradford note that she maintained genuine affection for Rainier, took immense pride in her role as matriarch of the Grimaldi house, and actively rejected the portrayal of herself as a trapped victim. She repeated it in public for 2 decades. So, independent wealth, executive budgetary authority over 2 international organizations, a published book, a narration credit, poetry tours across 2 continents, an apartment in another country, and a documented public position that she chose all of it. There is one problem with taking that at face value. It is the same problem that haunts every public statement by every royal spouse in history. A princess consort defending her marriage in an interview is not a neutral witness. She is an employee of the institution being evaluated, and the palace press office reviewed the transcript. Nobody in that position testifies freely. Associates and biographers report private admissions of artistic frustration that sit awkwardly beside the public contentment. The historical record does not settle it. Whether Grace Kelly carried a long-term regret about the career she ended at 26 is a question the surviving evidence simply cannot answer, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling a documentary. September 13th, 1982. A 1971 Rover P63500 descends the D22, the mountain road that runs from Rock Aggle down toward Monaco through a sequence of hairpins cut into the rock. Princess Grace is driving, and her 17-year-old daughter Stephanie sits beside her. Somewhere on that descent, Grace Kelly suffers a minor cerebral vascular incident, a stroke, small, catastrophically timed. The car misses a hairpin turn and leaves the road entirely, dropping roughly 120 feet down the mountainside and into the ravine below, with her daughter beside her. She reaches Monaco Hospital with severe cerebral trauma, a fractured femur, and injuries to the thorax. On September 14th, a second intracranial hemorrhage occurs, irreversible. After medical consensus confirms brain death, Rainier and the family agree to withdraw life support, and Princess Grace of Monaco dies at 10:55 that night, aged 52. The rumors started before the funeral, and both of the durable ones are false. The first put Stephanie behind the wheel, an underage princess losing control while the palace buried the file. Official Monegasque police investigation, forensic analysis of the wreckage, and eyewitness testimony from the driver of a truck following the rover down the D22 all place. Grace Kelly behind the wheel. It is false. The second claims sabotage, the brakes tampered with over financial or casino disputes. Engineers from British Leyland, the company that built the car, examined the wreck and found no mechanical failure and no interference with the brakes of any kind. The crash began inside her skull, not in the car. The ending of this story contains no conspiracy and no institutional villain. A woman driving her daughter down a mountain road suffered a stroke, and that is all. After 26 years of treaties, dowries, protocol, blockades, and canceled films, the thing that ended it came down to a blood vessel and a hairpin turn on a road she drove hundreds of times. So, Gilded prison. And does the evidence carry the word? Half of it, and only half, because the gilding is documented beyond argument, while the prison is contradicted by the same body of evidence that documents the gilding. Her acting career was terminated by royal protocol and announced by her husband at a press conference in 3 words. Every film she ever shot was banned from the cinemas of the country she lived in. A return to Hitchcock overridden by public outcry and dynastic requirement inside a crisis that overlapped a French blockade and purchased nothing at all. 0 constitutional authority in the state she symbolized, and a body of dynastic law that placed her own children legally beyond her reach, exercised by a husband who used it, over her objections on her eldest daughter in 1978. That is a documented catalog of constraint, and nothing dissolves it. But prison is an absolute word, and absolutes have to survive contact with the whole record. Prisoners do not control their own capital or sign off on international aid budgets, and they do not publish with Doubleday, tour 2 continents reading Shakespeare, or maintain an apartment in a foreign capital for years at a stretch. Every one of those is documented, and each one takes a brick out of the metaphor. What the record actually shows is a woman who traded one institution for another and negotiated inside both. MGM owned her working years, and she carved out Broadway and Manhattan. The Grimaldi house owned her public identity, and she carved out flowers, poetry, aid money, and Paris. She lost the largest thing, the career, and it never came back. And she built something else in the space it left behind, which is not the same as freedom and is nothing whatsoever like a cage. The fairy tale lied. The prison lies differently, and more flatteringly to us than to her, because it converts a woman who kept negotiating into a woman who simply sat in a tower and suffered beautifully. The treaty clause is still there, and the ledger still reads $15,000. And in 1962, when an Academy Award winner lost the right to play a thief in a Hitchcock picture, the reason entered into the official record read, scheduling.